Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Megha Ralapati. I oversee the residency program at Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago. I'd like to give a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this conversation, and especially the artists who are participating in the discussion and joining us in this virtual space today. I'd like to especially show my gratitude for you all who are participating in our multi-part virtual engagement program, which seeks to connect art practice in Chicago and Malaysia through a group of interdisciplinary practitioners, and also build upon artist Veshalini Naidu's residency at Hyde Park Art Center from earlier this year. I want to mention that today's program is part of a larger initiative we've developed with Asian Cultural Council to deepen the connection between artists and art communities based in Chicago and across Southeast Asia through residencies, performances, virtual programs, studio visits, and other modes of engagement for artists in both geographies. So for today, we are really very thrilled to welcome Veshalini in this role as organizer and to be able to continue the artistic and idea sharing that started during the residency and started with so much enthusiasm and so much generosity. And we get to continue that work in this virtual space now with a wonderful group of artists over the next couple of months. This program speaks very directly to the goals of the residency program in the essential nature of connecting community-based practices and finding their counterparts across the world. So I would like to thank Asian Cultural Council for its support of this program. So with that, I will turn it over to Vesha, our organizer, to introduce the program and the artists. Thank you.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this journey. It's going to be a really interesting conversation about anti-racist practices at home and abroad. Yeah, my name is Vesha, as Megha mentioned. And the reason that I have come to this is because lately I've been very curious about what it looks like as people who, in the context of Malaysia, a colony now becoming independent and still having these similar structures, being in spaces and art making, which has also been inherently white. How do we make sure that within our own process of making art, not just the institutional level, that we are having these and practicing anti-racist values and creating work that is inclusive, as we then also try to shape the greater structures within the system. Yes, and with me today are really great people, which I am very excited to speak to, and I will let them just very quickly introduce themselves, who they are and what they do, and then yeah, we'll get to it. Rupa, would you like to start?
Hi, thank you, Vesha. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. My name is Rupa Subramaniam. My background really was in digital media, and I turned to very traditional formats where I can use my hand because I felt like that was a skill that was slowly slipping out of me. And since then, I have been a visual artist first, moving into the curator's role. But what I think has been the foundation of my work is sort of an intersection between community, the digital space, as well as some sort of artistic format. So I try to work with artists of different kinds and redefine what creativity or innovation in that space actually means. So I'm not used to the idea of my work being called maybe anti-racist work. And so this is still quite fresh, the idea of it itself. So it's with peers like Dhinesha and Vesha. I think some of the artists are also figuring out in Malaysia, where do we stand when it comes to languages like this? How do we define our work in these spaces? And I'm really looking forward to have this conversation go on, and I'll pass this to Dhinesha to introduce himself.
Thanks, Rupa. Thank you, Vesha, for trusting us with this conversation and journey. Really excited to see where this goes today, as well as in the subsequent conversations we have. My name is Dhinesha Karthigesu. I use to pronounce he, him, his. I am a multidisciplinary storyteller. A lot of the stories I tell revolve at the moment around spaces like theater, fiction, as well as comics, occasionally visual arts and poetry. I believe in this idea of telling queer and Malaysian stories while also holding space for conversations on identity and creativity. I'd actually also like to name the fact that, considering it's a conversation between Chicago and Malaysia, that one of the things that really helped clarify the work and art that I make was watching a Chicago drag queen by the name of Sheikule on RuPaul's Drag Race All-Star Season 5. And in the final episode, there was a conversation, and she basically named how her drag is a love letter to Black women. And there was something about watching her say that sort of clicked in my head. So now I sort of quote, reference, and paraphrase Sheikule everywhere I go to say how much my work is a love letter to brown boys. I'd also like to reference the fact that I use the word brown a lot when talking about my practice, but brown means a lot of different identities, especially even within Nusantara and Southeast Asia. But when I'm talking about the word brown, I'm referencing the Malaysian Indian identity, Malaysian Indian bodies, and people of Malaysian Indian descent. And for me, the anti-racist conversation began through the medium of theater and has now occupied my entire life as I question it in all art forms and everything that I do. Yeah, that's all for now. I will pass it to Nikki.
Thank you. Appreciate that. My name is Nikki Patin. I am an artist working in a lot of different practices. I'm also a mom, so if you see a 7-year-old pop up in the background, don't be alarmed. He belongs to me. You have the same face. I got, sorry about that. I got my start as a spoken word artist. Also like singer-songwriter, been in like 10 bands. I've dabbled in burlesque, I've dabbled in visual art. Ultimately, I think that my sort of family background has really pushed me to claim this work often when I wanted to put it down and kind of do other things. My grandmother, who was a white Jewish woman, was a writer, a poet, and she would leave her poems all over the house, and they were never seen or heard by anybody. Her father was virulently racist, and so in a work that I'm sort of immersed in right now, I'm working on a biomythography, and one part of it, and I feel like this kind of sums up my whole situation. I have a letter to my great-grandfather, and I tell him in that letter that the only way that he has relevance now is through the mouth of his Black granddaughter, as a racist white man. And so to me, my work is all about looking at the intersections of so many different identities that I straddle. So, we're looking at race, but we're also looking at gender. We're looking at sexuality. We're looking at size. As a 42-year-old, single mother, we're looking at that. We're looking at class. I grew up in a, very poor family, like, in projects in Chicago, southeast side of the city. And so to me, when we talk about racism, when we talk about anti-racism showing up in work, I can't like pull it apart from all the other things that I'm also sort of confronting in the work that I do. So to me, I like to just kind of embrace all of it and throw it all into the pot, say a lot of things that make people very uncomfortable. That's my happy place. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jenn.
I'll say to everything Nikki just said. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. I'm Jenn Freeman, also known as Pochop. My pronouns are she, her. I am a multidisciplinary artist, but I am rooted in burlesque, drag, nightlife scene. Recently, my work has been geared towards reframing, reimagining who and why we worship and praise, using the work of Audre Lorde as sacred text and really creating worship services where her work is, our guiding light. And that has been super transformative for my life as well as my art practice. and really thinking about, I also don't really think that I ever have used the term anti-racist when I think about my art practice, but preparing for this talk, I was like, I guess that is what I'm doing. Like really, I guess, but I do it as a way to heal my own self. I grew up in the church as a queer Black person, and like that was a thing that I had to confront in order to free myself. And so, yeah, I'm gonna end there. That's who I am. And I'm going to go with Jackie.
Hello, everybody. First of all, it's an honor to be sharing space with all of you. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jacquelyn Carmen Guerrero. I am a multidisciplinary artist working in performance and visual art, as well as organizing spaces and events. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, and I have a multiracial background that is Puerto Rican, Afro-Cuban, and also European descent. So my work, my personal art practice really works to unpack and process these different facets of identity, from race to gender and sexuality, on a public scale. And my organizing practice is around creating inclusive spaces for community and sharing art and sharing music and sharing love on the dance floor. And so I also DJ, go by DJ Coochie Fruit. And yeah, it's just an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I think listening to all of you talk about your practice, and though it's like, it's a summary though, it's so powerful, because I think it already gets to the thing that we all are overlapping with each other, which is identity and identity with the body. And that's kind of where I want to like begin this conversation, is a time either within your own practice, within work, or maybe otherwise, where you felt your whole body and the identities that intersects with feeling safe and belonged. And if there is an almost like that space that you wish to create or recreate or are creating within the work that you do. Yeah. And anyone can answer this. Yeah.
So I want to jump in and say that I don't know if I've ever felt safe in my work. I just don't. I mean, I think that, you know, as a you know, bigger Black person who's queer, I feel like the second that I step onto a stage, like expectations are already loaded. And that's shifted over the last 20 years. Like that shifted from like Monique to like Lizzo. Like that's, you know, like I can see like that spectrum and how our sort of like perceptions around, you know, bigger Black femme bodies, you know, have been perceived, and how I've either, you know, played with that or against that. And that's now, I think, conscious decision making that I'm doing as a performer. Am I going, you know, with the grain of people's expectations or against the grain of people's expectations? So that's something that I think about. The other piece that I want to say is that for me, the goal is no longer safety, as much as it is about bravery. That's one thing that we say in a group that I helped to found, and we meet once a week, called Surviving the Mic, which is, you know, for survivors of trauma. And that's what we say about our community guidelines, that we can't promise anyone that we can keep them safe, but what we can do and what we work toward is to keep folks brave, and we can't do that. So that I think to me is where I'm at with that feeling. Like it's never felt safe, and when it has felt, you know, it just never has for me.
Yeah, I definitely relate to what Nikki said. I think in my whole process, I've been or rather, when I work with brown bodies, I did a project where for 30 days I invited women to come in and speak to me. So in exchange for their stories, I painted on their bodies and I documented what sort of that meant for them. So it was in a way for me like a modern day ritual to maybe re-identify the person who was inside or wearing the body. Like I was asking questions like, what is that relationship between the mind, body, and soul? And then really trying to figure out which parts of how the community or the society was looking at them. And I realized like the women who came to me had a spectrum of experiences, and it can the trauma or the foundation that they had for wanting to come to that practice with me really diversed, right? But the overarching theme of bravery, like how well you cope with yourself, is, I thought, how much power they gave onto somebody else to define the narration of the story, and how many of them took power for themselves. And so the feeling of safety then maybe comes from me defining it, that I can choose my peers or I can choose my audiences, whether in a physical space or on a digital space. But there are times where my work does not kind of listen to me and it goes beyond, or it's got a mind of its own, right? So it sort of like spreads in a way I have no control over. So when I know that could happen and the context of the audience, I feel is not my responsibility to educate or nurture or inform. So then it sort of becomes, I'm doing this because this is my voice, and I fought really hard to find this voice, and I'm in that space where I'm comfortable sharing that voice as well, so that like maybe someone else who hears it then has a different interpretation of it and sort of wakes up in their own context of how they relate to this in their bodies, right? And every time I experience that with my audience, when they have a sort of a moment where they like, I've never thought of it that way, almost then reflects back to me and my art practice, and gives me again new layers to work around, to interpret. So that I think that just that whole process of exploring, you definitely need bravery, because like it kind of would maybe sometimes push you to a corner where you yourself haven't been there before, and to confront that space, you need that guts, and how that comes out as an output. Again, I feel it's not in my control, but that feeling I hold then becomes what I work with, I suppose.
Mm. 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 Yeah, that's a bit, it's, yeah, actually, yeah, both what you said, Rupa, and also Nikki, like that's a very good point, right? Safe, is it safety or is it bravery? And now that I'm reflecting too, like I don't think I've ever actually felt safe, not even within my own work. But yes, braver to react and move. Like if I can think of one, most recently was actually a reading for Dhinesha's play called Ramayana, which is a retelling of the Ramayana with a queer lens. It was the first time I was seeing an almost all Indian cast and sitting there reading, which is a rarity, you know, and it shouldn't it occurred to me that it shouldn't take a reimagination of an Indian epic to bring Indian people together like this. But for the first time, like I walked into a theater space and I'm actually not, I am manifesting in this theater space as the identities that I hold as queer and as Indian. And that is fine. That's not something that needs to be filtered in any way possible. And as much as I knew that cerebrally, I needed to see it, and have my body be in that space to kind of go like, oh, right. This is why the work needs to keep happening. And I love like I've been following Surviving Something, Nikki, that you've also like post on Facebook, and it's been really good to also look at the language also that you do share, right? Language that's more affirming, language that is braver. And I love this idea of framing, right? Surviving something, or this idea of survival, as also how we go through the world, because I think a lot of times there is this kind of filtering that tends to happen too, right? This idea of thriving, or we tell ourselves that, okay, yes, that the world is ours, or like, you know, we can take up space and, you know, this is it, when that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of other things that are happening in the background, and that it's instead not so much that we're coming out of this unscathed and this is, you know, like, oh, here's the wonder of Indian, but no, this is the survival of Indian, right? And like I love how in a context then of this, of an as anti-racist practice, that the anti-racist practice is the survival of this, of being colonized, of being an indentured labor, of being enslaved, of being consistently demonized and also subjugated to this day. And that everything that we do within the intersections that we exist is this survival of our current climate, which I really, really appreciate. Yeah.
Thanks, Rasha. Yeah, I mean, I think like for me, there were two moments as a performer that kind of were turning points for me, and they were both moments that felt extremely dangerous. The first was a piece called Sweat, which was the piece that ended up on HBO where I was running in place. And it had this very visceral impact on me where I was out of breath and sweating in front of an audience, which as a bigger person, like felt like the gateway to like hell and embarrassment and humility. But stepping into that discomfort brought me to like a different place artistically. And then the second moment was when I performed burlesque, because taking off my clothes in front of an audience wasn't, you know, it didn't feel like something that like people were like necessarily excited about, you know. It was something that actually people would come up to me afterward and be like, you're so brave for taking off your clothes, which they only say to you when they hate your body. Like, you know, you're so brave because like you're not really showing off as much as you're sort of I don't know, like exposing or confessing something. And so to me, like that idea of like danger or discomfort has been something that's always pushed my practice further. The more uncomfortable, the more sort of dangerous it feels to me, that's when I know that I'm kind of on the right track.
On this note of danger, that reminds me of Dee, your piece that you did for this festival that happened last year, 2019. It's called Urban Scapes. It's just this kind of like one of those, you know, really hippie, I mean, what's the word, gentrifying festivals that take over the city. And Dee and I were part of a poetry ensemble that was all Indian. And I think what was really interesting is that, you know, one, the location, and one that you've never see an all Indian poetry ensemble to begin with. But Dee, yeah, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what that experience was for you, especially, and what you brought into that space.
Sure. I think for me, that particular bit, and, you know, especially, so just 2 points that Nikki had said that I was like, I need to reference it. Nikki, first of all, sweat is amazing. I've watched the video. I remember just screaming at the screen at how brilliant that performance piece is. But the earlier bit you said earlier about a letter to your great-grandfather, and I really resonate with that, just because I'm currently piecing together an actual letter to my great-grandfather in submission for a zine, and just wondering what that conversation is with someone who doesn't exist anymore. And how different our lives are and the choices we're making. So I just wanted to reference those two things. With regards to this performance piece, basically, as Nikki and Rupa, both of you were talking, I was reminded of how a lot of my work starts here and in my heart, but it actually doesn't involve my body. My body makes me very uncomfortable. Utilizing my body makes me very uncomfortable. Being in my body makes me very uncomfortable, which also plays out in ways that I sort of like, I guess now that I'm thinking about ways that I punish my body or try to push my body to its exhaustion and things like that. But that particular bit involved me sort of like almost like removing layers of clothing, but also removing layers of identity, and just being like that I am Indian, I am queer, I am male, I am all of these things. And to be fair, I was wearing like, you know, it was like a shirt, and there was like a singlet, and then the shirt comes off, and then another shirt goes on top. And like, it's nothing, like absolutely nothing. I was really not, like, it was not really bare-bodied, but there was just that, you know, in an audience of people I didn't know, in an open space, in a public space, it was very uncomfortable for me. And that's a whole tangent. But I think that's just because I really just this revelation of just, I don't step into my body a lot. And even in moments of stepping into my body and vulnerability on stage, I have a tendency to have a lot of guards up. I know how to protect myself, which is, I feel, sometimes a detriment. But basically, this performance just involved me in the middle of a courtyard, running through these different identities and talking about it and referencing it. And it ended with me basically putting on a T-shirt that says, it says I am a Kaling too. And for context to everyone, the Kaling, or the K word, as I'm going to reference it from now on, is a word that has been used against the Malaysian Indian community, that while it may have roots, its roots are debatable, it has now become a slur. And so I was wearing that shirt in reference to a friend who was sort of trying to reclaim the word. I don't think the N word with the Black community, I would reference it to say how it feels to us as bad as that, but it really isn't as bad as that, but it is a bad word. But that's the best way to describe how bad that word is. And a friend was reclaiming the word, and I was very deliberate to throw it on as part of the final bit of performance, and to just watch the audience read the words and just go, oh, he just went there. And then also like those who cannot see, trying to be like, what's the word? What's the word? And then like being like, I can't say the word out loud. It's a bad word. And just seeing that sort of interaction take place with a word that a lot of people have different reactions to, and have you sort of reference a friend who is trying to claim that word. But for me, generally, I also want to say, hearing what Rupa and Nikki said, I think I definitely operate with a lot of male privilege in a world that is made to make me feel safe. And therefore, I tend to operate in a way that is very safe, because the world is designed for people like me who present very male, tend to be straight passing at times, and cisgender. So just to reference that as well, I think it's important, because a lot of people think male privilege is not real because they're stupid. Yeah.
Which is, you know, it reminds me of the work that you actually do, Jen. When I was going to your website, and I saw the People's Church, and I saw the video on litany, and how vulnerable I thought that was. I'm curious, like, what was going through your mind actually, in the performance of it, and kind of becoming these very important iconographic figures, but by having that context also in the now, right? And having that on your body. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, a part of identifying as a burlesque performer is, yes, I'm shedding, layers, but I think also there's a vulnerability that comes with that I also want, yeah, I want that to be clear too, that I am revealing a part of my identity as well. I also totally agree that it's interesting when you're putting your body out there that way, the way that people respond, especially when we could perform live. Because I think that when people witness your body, particularly bare, in a performance mode, it creates a feeling that they now own a part of it, or it gives them a in to comment, to say things like, you're so brave, or oh my God, those legs, or like whatever it is. And I think in their mind, they are like, it's intended to be positive, but they don't realize within themselves like what is behind that. Yeah, I didn't answer your question at all, but I was just thinking about that while thinking about taking my clothes off. Yeah.
No, which is such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
true.
what goes through my mind is honestly trying to connect with spirit. I'm trying to connect to what I consider the Holy Spirit, but to spirit. I'm trying to get free. I'm trying to like release all of the barriers that I put into my mind when it comes to movement, when it comes to art making, like all of those little whispers that pop up in my brain. I'm trying to shake them off.
I call that rare air. That's what I
Say
call
more.
it, because it just happens to me. For me, it happens so rarely, which is why I call it rare air. When you're in that space where for me, it really feels like I'm just channeling. Yeah. Like I'm not even like, I'm not thinking. I'm not like, I'm just very present and like very into like what is happening in that moment. I'm not really thinking about the audience. I'm not thinking about what I should be looking like, what I should be sounding like. I'm just literally channeling whatever is happening in that moment. But it's for me, a very rare, I think that's the goal, is to like figure out like, how do I get there, and how do I like intentionally get there like all the time. So still working on it.
Yeah.
My note, I mean, just in response to like Jen, and we've known each other for many years, starting through burlesque, and just also acknowledging the history of burlesque and how white of a space that it is. And I think for many probably burlesque performers, it is about look at my body, and and for others there's political intentions, or even just being present and engaging in this art form is a political statement in and of itself. And so and the kind of work that you produce, Jen, is so like it's like it really transcends that genre. And so that I was just like, it's I think being exposing like a physicality, but also like that spirit, that inner intention. I don't know, really powerful. So I was just thinking about that. And I know that there are a lot of artists that are overlooked in the history of burlesque, artists of color and Black burlesque performers too. And so it's like having the visibility and your like legacy helping to transform those conceptions is really important. And Nikki too. I know I'm just talking to Jen because I've known Jen for a long time, but I know, Nikki, that is a part of your practice too. And so also acknowledging that it has a significance and legacy of what you're doing.
Yeah. I was even thinking about when we were talking about danger, some of the spaces that we were in together performing, coochie, and like in hindsight, it wasn't necessarily dangerous, but it was dangerous. Like I just remember like you specifically doing some very provocative acts, and like provocative in like a way that like honestly I think it went over a lot of people's heads, but it just made them so uncomfortable. Like they had a visceral response, and like I mean I think that is dangerous, because in those spaces, like I don't know, they didn't know how to respond. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like sometimes when people don't know how to respond, it just like it's like shaking a can and like opening it immediately. Like it can be messy. I'm here for the messy, but as an artist, sometimes it could be dangerous for us if we don't feel it. It can be reckless. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I don't
and
think
like definitely like in the beginning, I never felt like I wanted to perform in a lot of the spaces where it was like a lot of white men, like, you know, things like that. And eventually, you know, bringing drag into it. I feel like those are maybe the performances that you're talking about where like, maybe I'm wrong, but there is like a gender queer presentation and an exploration of gender outside of like a high femme I don't know, it is kind of like a flamboyant expression of like masculinity and sexuality in a way that I do think that people weren't ready.
No, they weren't ready. And it's like afterwards, I definitely remember thinking they weren't ready, but they needed it. They needed that lesson. And as much as like they needed it, I also was like, at what cost to the artist? Like at what cost to us are we giving these people these sermons that they definitely need to be taking notes of? But what does that mean for our spirits too? Like, when do we need to ourselves?
Yeah, especially when it's like you're just performing for tips, or you know, everybody else is making money except you, because if you don't get tipped, you don't make money in some of these situations. And so like, yeah, what is the you know, the economic situation, you know, like, is it, you know, perpetuating you know, kind of like the consumption of our bodies. And I think that is, you know, sometimes there is a benefit to it of like, oh, I'm getting this experience, or like, I just want to share my work, or I just want to perform. But then after a while, like, you know, it becomes really oppressive after a while. And that's when, you know, I think artists like go disappear for a while because it took so much and you gave so much, and it's like you bared your soul and your body, like everything. But I think that's you know, I think we've all kind of taken away our lessons on how to make our practice sustainable, like not only, you know, financially, but also like spiritually sustainable.
That's a really good point. I've been thinking about that too, right? This idea of almost like the minority labor of having to do the education, and you're doing it with the work, right? And people come in and then they consume it. And as much as it's, yes, you are, it is platforming, it is representation, right? It's making space, but how so much of, so like, oh, it happens so many times, right? Where the people who come in and they just kind of like, oh my God, look at all this, like, oh, all this culture, which I feel like Rupa, you might be able to speak to, especially with the banana leaf exhibition that happened last year, which all three of us were involved. Dee and I did a project together called Roja, which was about, it's a research-led project where we collect stories from Indian women, from Malaysian Indian women, and collecting their stories, all of it rooted in the sari. And so we had like an installation. It's a stretch of sari cloth that we collected from 2 different states, the state where I'm in, which is Negeri Sembilan, and for Dee, it's in Selangor, which is where KL is in. And we had all these anecdotes of interviews that we had from people that we spoke to, as well as their saris, in the space, right, which is filled with also other Indian artists And a question that was going through my mind throughout the entire thing is also like how this is so powerful for Malaysian Indians, right? To enter this space, especially the location, GMBB being this kind of like, you know, very, what's another word for atas? The English word, I am missing it. I suppose like affluent, maybe.
Affluent,
Yeah.
hipster.
Just kind of classist in ways.
Bougie.
Bougie, yeah, yes, yes, bougie. You know, and us sitting here and just knowing, right, like the certain people who are walking into the space, looking at this art, right, which was a lot of labor of love, and very important, and was an entire journey for a lot of the artists in there, kind of just going like, wow, how beautiful, right? Look at these saris, look at this color, you know, and then even within the exhibitions, right, the photography exhibitions of these Indian bodies, right, which are so, I think, which is so powerful and confrontational to just go and like, oh, how nice. Just a group of beautiful Indian people, and just kind of like, and losing the significance of why this is here. Yeah. And I think as organizer, Rupa, I think you can definitely say a lot more to that, right?
Yeah, I think giving context to the work, to maybe points of view. One is the sari itself. It's about a 4-meter long traditional garment that is usually glorified in certain occasions, and in certain other occasions it's deemed as inappropriate, sexy. So there's also this idea of policing how the Indian women who are wearing the garment, like it's almost like we don't have say towards how we want to fashion it, how we want to carry it. Rather, it's been imposed on us, at least in the last few years that I've been active in the scene, to say exactly this is how you can and cannot wear it. And the idea of decency then ranges from, what would your brother say about this? What would this random person you meet on the street say about this? So really the idea for this, or the rage I got from this, started in 2017 because there was a group of men that wanted to threaten to spray paint women who were wearing this traditional attire, because your midriff is visible, and they said that, like, showing too much of skin is your invitation to be harassed publicly, and therefore if I find you in the streets, I'm going to take a spray paint and spray your body in public. There were not many people that actually thought that this was harassment. Instead, they were sort of rationalizing why this is an appropriate thing to do, because they have to safeguard brown Indian women's bodies. So my works maybe started as a tongue-in-cheek response, because I said, if these guys are going to spray paint these women, I should paint their bodies instead, because at least it will be prettier. And that's kind of how I started to have this conversation around saris. And when Vesha and Dhinesha installed their work in the Banana Leaf art exhibition, it was glorious to see the kind of responses we were getting from our audiences, because people sat down with it, and what Vesha and Dhinesha did was to invite the audiences to reflect upon this garment, to think about what they felt when they saw this work, right? So there were mothers coming the point of view of how it was sad for her to see her child draped in a sari, because it meant that she has now lost her child, and the child, her daughter, is now going to be, in a way, judged by society, and there was so much sadness in what this woman wrote. But there was also things like, someone had written that when I first saw a woman in a sari, I thought she was God. And that was then very powerful to read as well, to say that like these are, again, these are the spectrums that the audiences are thinking about the work. And so for the exhibition then to be viewed by people of different ethnicity and different racial backgrounds, from the organizers' point of view, it was quite easy to see who found it powerful. Um, it was the people that I was representing, because they said, I've never seen um, the glory of brown people all in one place, and just the diverse representation of all the different social classes that exist within this whole minority group, right? And that was precisely what banana leaf was meant to do. And banana leaf, again, for context, is a traditional Indian meal we have, where um, plenty of dishes are served on quite physical banana leaf itself with rice. And I thought that was how I wanted to serve art as well, that like all of us could sit in for that meal and have a completely different aftertaste. Like you could have a really filling, huge vegetarian meal if you wanted to, or you could have a really spicy one that like completely leaves you thirsting for water, or a very small portion. The meal itself gives you that much freedom and flexibility. Um, and again, even the culture of having banana leaf is now a more commercial experience in Malaysia. So people don't understand the context of um, how traditionally banana leaf meals were served to public, and why it was such a communal experience. And so kind of bringing back all of these ancient ideas in the Hindu practices um, in a more contemporary space, and doing it with a twist of like maybe um, I wouldn't say fun, but just in an experience where the Indian artists that are working on those subject matters are, are genuinely expressing it, or are genuinely going through it. And then for us to have space that we can put this out there, again, because most of the gallery spaces in Malaysia would ask you to sign a documentation that says you cannot touch racial or political issues, or any subject matters that um, relates to sexuality or nudity, right? So when I then organize, how do I negotiate these spaces? How do I keep my artists safe as well? And with the different audiences that come in, how do they perceive and view this work? When sometimes they may not have context to why those works exist. So yeah, that Dhinesha, do you want to share your experience? Like how then also from that time we worked together, it's been a year since, kind of like thinking about how powerful that experience was for us as well to also connect. But at the same time, I think the conversation has taken like different parts completely.
I'm sure. I think it's a. I want to also point out how, when we talk about our work, how a lot of us, I guess we build language around our work, right? Like our terminology and vocabulary, and we're able to talk about it. Like, Rupa was the one who gave me and Vesha the term multidisciplinary, and we're like, oh yeah, we are. Okay, we're gonna call ourselves that now. And how much we build language around things, and we're like, I think we make ourselves sound really awesome. Which is useful because then, the systems require us to build ourselves up. But I also remember as Vesha and I were building that visual arts installation, we were just like half the time we had no idea what we were doing. And we were just like, we're just going to lie, we're going to pretend, we're going to make this all seem intentional. But really halfway through, we're like, I don't know. We're just going with the flow. I want to sort of name that a little because I think as artists, we there's a lot that is flow. There's a lot that is sort of trust and run with the process. But also we then conjure up, I suppose, explanations later on once we've done it, And I think just because it was for both of us, it was our first visual arts installation, and just putting it together and just like coming up with excuses in our head, oh, this is why we're doing this, this is why we're doing this, and then see people maybe catch that intention a little or like find different variations of it. I think our biggest surprise, or at least our biggest surprise was the instinct to get the audience to participate. I don't think we were anticipating the response, because I think we went from 12 transcripts to, Vesha, what was our final count? 48?
72 was the
Yeah.
final cut.
72. Yeah, we started with 12 transcripts of people's response to the sari that was printed, and then audiences came in. We had paper, pen ready and then people just started responding, and some of them responded in Tamil, which is a language that at least for me, I can understand, but I can't read. But yeah, so we had people writing in languages that they were familiar with, people writing in, people drew stuff, and it was just this like massive, over 2 weeks, we had all of this response come in where people were just responding to this material. And even the collection itself, basically what we did was we just said, hi, we're looking for saris, anybody wants to donate? And we were kind of hoping that people would give us one from the collection, except we had aunties call us and be like, I have boxes, come. And so Vesha and I basically drove all around these 2 states, just meeting all these like random Indian aunties who are like, take my saris, and giving us bags and bags of saris, which are still in our cars. In Vesha's case, it's in their place, but it's just hundreds of saris. And then we still get these calls to this day, a year later, to be like, hi, do you all still need saris? My friend wants to give them away. And I'm like, sorry, auntie, but thank you, but I cannot. I have no place to put it ready. Please stop giving me saris. But I think for us, that was the community element that we were not expecting. The audience response, as well as this sort of network of Indian aunties who just wanted to talk to us and find out what we were doing and just give us stuff for free and just be like, this is my old saris, I won't use it anymore, or like, I'm leaving the country, please take this. And then just to see that was really fascinating. I guess that's been the community-based sort of response. Yeah.
I think like you brought up a really good point, Dee, about the ways that we build ourselves up. Because so another thing that kind of occurred to me, this idea of bios, right? As artists, how we list our accomplishments. And recently I was in a conversation with my partner, and they were saying that, for their bio, that they learned this like from being in these radical spaces in the US. They spent 5 years in Boston and, did their dance training there. And they said that they don't, so within their bio, they actually, instead of like being the whole like graduated from so notable performances it is instead that they are, they are Malaysian Chinese settler, right? And kind of like naming just their ancestry and naming their position and naming where they come from and what that heritage is, and also what the consequence of that heritage is. And I wonder, like, one made me think about how, as we do these practices, right, as we take over spaces which ask us to sign off and silence ourselves and say, don't talk about race, or when we do performances in a festival, right, when we put our bodies at risk, whether the spaces, whether it's enough to just like, I guess maybe the question really is, can the work truly be anti-racist if the environment is not? If we are having to, you write a play that is we believe, and it is in all its forms, in the way you synthesized it was anti-racist, but to put it in a black box, can it still hold that? If we were to engage grant systems and funding and what that looks like and the structures of the funding, can it still be anti-racist? What is a way that we can continue to build in spaces where yes, funding is an issue, and finding that kind of stability is an issue? Is there a way for this to not actually be a compromise? Is there a holistic approach to making fully anti-racist work, if that is even a possible question? Yeah.
I'm going to jump in with my recent experience. I teach art as well, 4 years old until like 19 years old. So we had a small art competition going on, and we had great submissions. And as the teacher, I chose the works based on the progress that my students have been showing, as well as like their dedication and commitment to my classes. And also, of course, how well did they interpret the brief that I gave them. So when I was done selecting like the top 4 works, and when we were putting down the names, we suddenly realized that it was an all non-majority name list, right? So there were 3 Indians and 1 Chinese name in that winning list. So then the question of diversity came out and representation. So because all of my peers were also Indians, we were then worried if we would be accused of being biased to our own kind if this name list would go out, and because there was no representative from the majority race, which for us, the Malay community. I think and the kind of simple solution was to remove one of the art pieces that was more similar. But I think the student that I picked, I was quite I picked particularly that because of the technique, and the execution was by a huge way very different to the other idea that was kind of similar in the output of it. And then I thought it was really unfair just to take one student's work out and put another student's work in, because my final output to the community has to be representative and has to be diverse. So then what is my role here as an art teacher, or then as a judge? And am I being anti-racist if I am being inclusive, and if I am trying to be diverse, or am I actually going against what I am thinking about by sort of succumbing to that pressure of needing to include a representative from different races, not just by merit, right? So I'm thinking about that. I don't have the solutions, and either way I go, I think there's a sense of guilt, or there's a sense of like, what is the choice that I'm not making here? Yeah.
So we call that a trick bag.
Oh, go Nikki, go Nikki.
That's what we call that. It's a slang term that I use often in my life. Being put into a trick bag, meaning that like no matter how you try to get out, you're just caught up. So if you do it based on like merit, and like your 4 merit-based people are all the people that look like you, then you're accused of like, oh, you're prejudiced and privileging your own folks. If you do the other thing where you're sort of like overcompensating for like picking all the people that look like you, then all of a sudden it's no longer, there's like literally no way to win, because to me the game is rigged and the system is rigged. And so I think, like, to your point, Vesha, like, is there a way of holistically doing anti-racist, work here in the United States? To me, I mean, if you're going to pay me some money, that's probably going to end up in Jeff Bezos' pockets, like, who owns Amazon, or it's going to end up in like some other corporation owner's pockets. I would say, like, when I knew I was doing actively anti-racist work would have to have been in my early 20s, growing up in the south suburbs of Chicago, where my high school flag was a Confederate flag until 1993. And folks were, right, and this was a public high school. And so folks were riding around, and I don't know if y'all know what the Confederate flag is, but it was used to represent the South in the Civil War. They lost. They still haven't like come to terms with that. And so white folks in the South suburbs were actively riding around with like Confederate flags in the backs of their cars, on their t-shirts. And I would, as a young, very young baby poet, I would go to this Irish bar that was above the municipal airport in Lansing, Illinois, which now is like pretty much all Black, but back then was like all like racist white folks. And it was an Irish themed bar. It was all musicians in the open mic. It was all these white folks who their cars in the parking lots had like Confederate flags like in their back windows, and people were sporting this on their shirts. And I was going in as like the only like Black person, spoken word person without like an instrument, definitely not Irish. And I was like, let me just spit all these poems about race right here. Like, I wasn't making any money. Nobody was trying to give me any money. People were like clearly uncomfortable. And I think that's where I developed my taste for that danger. Cause I'm like, what you gonna do? Like, what, y'all all gonna beat my ass like in a bar? Like, we still in the 90s. Like, you know, like you're not gonna like stop me from saying what I want to say. Like, sorry, I'm killing everybody's vibe, but you need to hear all of these things that I have to say. That's probably when, for me, I felt like I was doing like holistically, like actively, like intentionally, like anti-racist, like let me put this shit right back up in your face work. But now, 20 years later, where there's like, you know, a lot of checks and money involved, I don't know if I can say the same thing.
I think on the note of sort of like connecting the question you asked, Vesha, as well as the earlier bit about bios, I wonder what it's like also as people of color, and how it's almost like a privilege to be able to write like a frilly bio that people don't really understand, that resonates with your practice, because then people don't take you seriously because they look at it and just like, ugh. Like, I remember the difference I used to get my bio when I would put in things like slam champion. Like, nobody gets it. Nobody knows what that is. But the moment you put something like that, it suddenly makes you seem amazing. And then suddenly people are like, oh, I shall take this person seriously. And I've been in so many spaces where I've been with white men, especially because, just so context as well, a lot of our international school systems here employ white teachers to teach English and other languages, who get paid really, really well, who can sort of like bounce around between schools, bounce around between countries, just waltz around the world. And I've been in a lot of spaces where I was the teacher and I was the person who was running the workshop, but because there was a white man there, everybody assumed he was going to teach, and everybody gravitates towards him. And then when the announcer starts, and then they're like, oh, you mean it's the brown boy? Oh, okay. And then like sort of like turn their attention. So I wonder also with the bios, how much we have to sometimes amp ourselves up, because if not, we don't get taken seriously. And I wonder if anyone else has, without having to like go into trauma porn, but just like, you know, I wonder if that's something that someone else also resonates with in connection to this idea of anti-racism, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I for sure identify with it. I also connected to like grant writing in general. I think there's like a certain language that you have to put on when writing a grant that is like rooted in academia, rooted in like institutional like language that is in a way it is a privilege to be able to access that language and have it about your work, as well as having a clean bio that has some accolades on it, that is recognizable. Definitely has made me more palatable almost, like, and also it allows people, like you were saying, to take me seriously, particularly as somebody who has a name, who asks people to like put pochop in writing. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, a lot of people will try to ignore that identity. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also have been thinking about following the, like, I haven't actually done it, but following the money. I think a part of like me taking on the definer of saying that my work is anti-racist, I think it also means that I have to like for me, if I'm gonna say that for real, I think that I have to be able to know where the money came from these foundations, as well as how am I spending it when it comes to materials, costumes, space, ticket price, like all of that, as well as like the venue, like where the space is gonna be, what is their policies, what does the bathrooms look like, are they calling the police, like all of these things, I feel like it's my responsibility to know and to, I don't want to say have control over, but to be aware of, and make a clear choice about.
Jen, I'm wondering how you feel about this idea then, you know, when you start asking those questions and then not to like spiral into a black hole of like question, and then sit in the corner and just cry and be like, too many questions, I can't take it anymore. Yeah, so I'm wondering how you're feeling about that, like, and how are you processing it and working through that?
Slowly.
Okay.
Yeah, very slowly, honestly, because I will spiral and then I'll be like, well, all money, in my mind, honestly, I have already spiraled. In my mind, all money leads to the prison industrial complex. And I'm like, burn it down. So I've already kind of spiraled, honestly. Yeah, and now again, I'm really slowing down my art practice and like how I'm sharing my work, who is connected with my work. Like I'm trying at least to be very deliberate, even more deliberate about that. And even that within itself is a privilege. Like it's a privilege to be able to be like, no, I'm not working with you, to say no to someone. Yeah.
I'm also then thinking about like earlier we were discussing about how art is also education, and then now probably art is sort of then a responsibility. When does that become a burden? And when the entire community sort of first is excited about you representing the work, and then suddenly starts imposing on you like you're supposed to represent then every different parts of the discussion, and do we have enough room and space to carry the entire burden on our shoulders? So I'm negotiating with those ideas as well. What do you guys feel about it?
I just before we continue, unfortunately, we are running out of time. Which is really sad. I know. But yes, on that question, and I think like I want to hear you, Jackie, as someone who organizes, right, as a performer who's also creating space at the same time, right, and having these dance parties. And I think like what's interesting is also the intersectionality of those identities within the space, right? How does that practice of anti-racism kind of like come in and manifest in the way that you like function as organizer, which is a whole like thing, and then also as performer? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, the desire to organize and co-organize spaces comes out of the desire to have a space for myself where, you know, like, again, going almost back to the very beginning of this idea of safety, right? We moved away from the language of safe spaces. You know, that was a thing in like 2005 to 2015, maybe. And then I'm sure Nikki and Jen can both speak to this. And so we have an idea, language around brave spaces and agreements and things like that. And I think it's a fine line sometimes between creating space and making room and policing space, you know, and what goes on in there with or regulating rules and things like that. It can be really difficult to, and it could be a little bit of that, what Nikki, we were saying, a little bit of a trick bag sometimes when you are, you know, trying to not oppress and to not be, you know, perpetuate harm in spaces, and it's really tricky. So I think that like what I was it's a lot But ultimately, it's like there's also a need to like protect and protect like the integrity of a space, and protect like an ideology and culture ultimately that becomes collectively produced. And I think I've struggled a lot with like, thinking about language, thinking about the language of like what it means to be a cultural producer, or, similar things like that, even what it means to be an artist responding to, responding to racism, or responding to homophobia or transphobia, all these phobias, when, I think I have an issue with the idea that like, I feel like there can be a glorification of artists, that like artists are the first ones who respond to things. And I'm just like, no, like, yes, but no, like I feel like that those ideas can become really like problematic, because everybody responds to oppression and racism and violence every day in their own ways. And so I that was like my kind of responding to everybody's comments in one comment. And I really want to keep talking, because I was also wondering if there are conversations about like reverse racism in Malaysia, what kind of conversations might be happening about that. So sorry to flip it, a little bit, but I think that ultimately, like with Trobiteca, which I created with my partner Natalie Murillo, who is Mexican American, like it is just wanting to have a space for our community to express, and wanting to foster that experimentation and a space to thrive and get our coins and our dollars and things like that. So
thank you so much for sharing, Jackie.
And to celebrate our lives.
Yes. Okay, I'm so sorry, everyone, that we have run out of time. So I suppose in closing, and I'll invite all of y'all to share final thoughts. And yes, I wish we had more time to get into that reverse racism and that complexity. But perhaps you'll be able to later with conversations among each other after this. So yes, final thoughts, everyone. I mean, if there are final thoughts also, no compulsion.
I think we could go on for hours about all of these things and all of the similarities and connections between our practices. And yeah, looking forward to more conversation.
Same. I think these dialogues are really necessary. Like, I think it's important to unpack what we do, how we do what we do. For me, starting in the arts was like an act of survival. It was a thing that like got me through a lot of like dark situations. And I think, my personal evolution has been one from a place of like doing what I needed to do to heal to actually then moving with like intentionality and consciousness. And it's taken a really long time to get to that point. And I don't even think I'm at like a particular point. But I think especially for artists who are not white, that trick bag of having to think of all these other layers of things, of safety, of protection, of decolonization. Where's my money going? Where's my money coming from? What institutions am I holding up? Even as I feel like I'm tearing things down. I think it's a lot, I think, to hold. And so I think these conversations are an excellent way to, I think, help us unpack that a little bit, because I think all of us are holding some piece of that, even if it's like subconscious. Like, I think all of us wrestle with like, where's it coming from? Where's it going? How, even as I'm critiquing or criticizing or analyzing or whatever it is, also, what am I upholding as I'm doing that? So thank you, Vesha, for providing us the space and platform to do that.
Yeah, I think for me, the question then sort of comes back to what do I feel it's right, and maybe going back to how I feel as a brown person in a brown body. Um, um, I think working less with my head and working more with my gut. So how what does my instinct say about moving forward with things? So I'm learning how to listen to my body in a very different way, rather than using the intellect to move forward with things. um, and I'm actually looking forward to spend the next maybe 10 years just exploring this part of the process, to let the body lead with its senses, rather than moving forward towards things intellectually. So that's also maybe what I'm getting out of this whole conversation, and what I'm excited to pursue next. So I really, really am excited about seeing how our works all sort of intersect with each other, and how this would cue to different processes in our own art making. Yeah.
For me, I think it's just the like Rupa said, just very excited to see where these like subsequent conversations can go. I feel like we just started something like there was this like we're just there, and then yeah, just there, we were right there. And so it'll be very interesting to see where it goes in like separate conversations and things like that. For me, definitely the idea of like Jackie said, to celebrate our lives. I think it's just so making me think how this conversation has reminded me of body. And so celebrate our lives, celebrate our bodies, and like tapping into that a little bit, a lot more. But also, Jen, when you were talking about this idea of like following the money, I think it makes me, I don't know, I feel both affirmed and excited, because I think when Vesha and I, or Rupa and I, have our conversations on this, we sometimes feel at a loss, or we feel like with spiral, but it's also so fascinating to know that other people are asking the same questions, and despite where everybody is in the artistic career, we are all asking these questions. And so there's something quite affirming and empowering that we're all asking these questions at different points, and also all still struggling in that questioning and not having answers just yet, and that being okay. I think that's coming up for me.
I don't have anything to add. I feel like I echo everyone else's closing statement. Yeah, I look forward to more conversation.
Can I say one little thing really quick before we leave?
Yeah.
Is
go,
that
go.
I personally have I like encourage people to redistribute resources as they can to communities, and that's definitely part of the thing that Tropiteca functions to do, is like redistribute resources to our community, to people of color, Black and brown people, trans people, queer people that are, have been denied access to these resources. And so sometimes I am of the opinion of like snatch the bag so that everybody can have more, so that's all I wanted to say.
Yes. Which really reminds me, I think in closing, I just want to say, in preparation for this, Tanuja Devi, who is a Chicago dramaturg, in an interview had mentioned the amount of resource that theater, I mean, as a theater person, like the amount of resource that theaters have, and that in situations or in communities which do not have as much, and what that role is to actually redistribute. And that perception, right, that in artists or like in art spaces that we don't have enough, there is a scarcity, which is true. It's very true. There is a scarcity, but to be within the spaces that is privilege, and how do we analyze and reflect on that privilege and find ways to then actually platform and support. And I think to, in a way, like to quote Nicole Brewer, who's also doing a lot of work on anti-racist theater, she said that, yes, that everyone has privilege, a certain amount of privilege. It's about identifying what that is, right? And how do you use it? So yes, thank you everyone for being here, for using the spaces that you have, using the talents that you have, using your gut, as Rupa has said, to kind of lead you into doing this really, really important work. And I agree with Dhinesha, we just almost just kind of, but hopefully we get to unpack this more later. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, and thank you for watching. Good night, Chicago.